Hello, I'm Kirsten.
And I'm Nicholas. Welcome to the Anthropocene.
The scene is set. You stand upon a hilltop. A vast stretch of desert scrub lies in front of you. Shrubs, cacti, and patches of grasses dot the sandy landscape in front of you. The sun overhead is a bright, hot, unforgiving sphere, causing the air to almost dance in front of you. Everything looks barren at first glance, but you wait quietly just a moment longer. Something scurries in the corner of your eye to the left. A bird blots out the sun momentarily as it soars by. The grasses shift in the light breeze, and you notice off to the left faint tracks in the sand. A dog, maybe? There is life here, if only you take a moment longer to find it. Now you turn 180 degrees and are met with a strikingly different scene before you. A bustling city with ever-stretching concrete, towering buildings, and the constant buzz of traffic, horns, and construction. Lots of it. You can almost see the line of the city advancing hungrily, swallowing up the desert around it. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to the Anthropocene. Nicholas,
what's up, nerds? Oh, it's been a while. It has been a while. We have not been... Well, I have been really bad at being productive regarding this podcast. I'm going to field all the blame. So
No, that's not fair either. Nicholas and I have been very busy. So before we really get started today, we want to apologize to our followers that we've been lagging a little bit here on recording. But to make up for that, we have a very exciting announcement that today we have our second ever guest, Zoë Rossman. So she's going to be here to speak to us about a very successful and equally controversial mammal that actually perfectly helps us to talk about the concept of neonatives, which we've mentioned before, as well as animals that, as opposed to being pushed out and dying off because of human impact, can actually thrive in like anthropogenic environments. So this is really exciting. Zoë, thank you for joining us. How are you today? Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me here. My name is Zoë Rossman. You call me Zoe. I use she, her pronouns. And yeah.
Perfect. All right. So this episode is going to look a little bit different than some of our normal full-length episodes. It's kind of more almost like a long anthropo snip. We're not breaking down necessarily an invasive species and its control methods and the things that we usually do. But we're looking at a really interesting human-wildlife interaction. And so we're going to talk a little bit as well about this mammal as a neonative in some areas too. So without further ado, today we're getting a little coyote ugly, or not so coyote ugly as we're going to call it today.
Oh my God.
Hey, come on, it's my turn for the bad puns.
We were gone for like 2 months and that was the best pun you could come up with.
It's not the worst pun.
It's not the best pun.
All right, Nicholas, let's hear your coyote puns.
Oh, I didn't know I was going to be put on the spot. This isn't my episode.
That's what you get for calling me out. Zoe,
give me a half hour. I'll think of something stupid.
All right, we're coming back to you at the end.
All right.
All right. So, Zoe, before we get down into the research, do you mind, if it's not too much trouble, telling us a little bit about you personally, some stuff you like, just to kind of show the person behind the science?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm currently here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, swelteringly hot, but I love it out here. I'm originally from super rural Northern California, so moving to the desert was a pretty big shift. And like everybody, I've been pretty cooped up and working from home over the last year or so. But yeah, I spend, aside from the whole research PhD thing, which can be sort of all consuming at times, I spend a lot of time outdoors here. Albuquerque is a great place to do hiking and biking and pretty much any other activity you might want to do except for swimming because we have no water. But yeah, it's me, my little goblin cat Thistle, and my like 75 houseplants. and we're just sort of bopping along until things get back to normal.
Great. Thank you so much. That's awesome. I know it's a little tricky to talk about yourself, but people really like to see a little bit of the person behind the science. So now we can get into the stuff that's easier to chat about. Do you mind helping us out with a bit of an elevator pitch about your research?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a PhD student here at the University of New Mexico in biology. And broadly, I'm trying to understand a little bit more about how certain species are so successful in urban environments. So, we've got this influx over the past, since humans started industrializing, but we have a lot of humans in cities, right? And we have a lot of cities all over the world. And a lot of people, including past me, thought of cities as very separate from nature, and that cities were where people were and nature was where plants and animals were, and there wasn't much crossover. But there's actually just an insane amount of diversity and life within our cities. And so I'm trying to understand what makes certain species, why certain species are suited to that type of life and maybe others aren't. And so specifically, I'm looking at coyotes, which are just this incredible animal, which you're going to hear probably more than you want to about today. But I'm looking at how coyotes are so successful in urban environments. And most of my research thus far has looked at that through the lens of diet, and specifically how coyotes rely on human foods and how that allows them to be successful, as well as whether all coyotes in, say, a super urban environment are relying on humans as a food, to provide some sort of cat food or food waste, et cetera, or whether maybe they're using other resources. And if individuals, like you and I, we differ in the things that we eat and the things that we like and what we seek out. So maybe critters like coyotes and some of these other animals that are really successful in these urban environments are doing the same thing.
Wow, that's so cool.
Right. So like stable isotopic analysis and things like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure we'll let you get into that. I have some experience with it, but I think every time that I have tried to communicate it properly, I always go to you to confirm what I'm trying to say. But in like a quick summary, essentially what she's talking about is different dietary needs of different animals. So not necessarily different species of animals, but the animals themselves.
That is super cool research. Something that I am super interested in too is to see how we like interact with nature. Because I think, like you said, so many of us, it's so easy to totally detach nature from cities, and even the things that live in cities, like pigeons and sparrows and up to coyotes. We almost don't even see them as nature or wildlife anymore. So it's such a interesting dynamic, and I'm super excited to hear a little bit more about it, for sure, from the perspective of a coyote. That's awesome. I have a funny, sad anecdote. I don't know. It's mostly funny to me. Once I was walking with my boyfriend, who's my husband now, and he was like, "Oh, it was so cool. I saw some baby bunnies here the other day. Like maybe we'll see them." And then we just saw, not sure if it was a fox or a coyote, but like run across the street and like scoop one up and like run away with the bunny. And it was just like a very like interesting.
The circle of life. How beautiful.
Yeah, I laughed a lot. Maybe I'm a little sadistic, but it was just a weird moment. All right. So the golden question before we get into it, is it coyote or coyote?
It's both. It's really a regional thing. Pretty much everybody that I collaborate with says coyote, so we'll see how long I hang on to coyote, but that's what I grew up saying. So
right. Yeah, I know. I've heard it so many different ways, and some people are very firm. It's kind of like the niche thing or data.
Oof, don't get me started on that one.
No, I don't like to get started on that one either, but yeah. Okay. All right. So we're going to go with a mix of the two, maybe, just to really confuse people.
Yeah. Drop in a coyote every now and then.
All right. Perfect. So what is a coyote?
So I'm gonna go with coyotes. Sorry. Yeah, it's the natural thing for me. So
Team Coyote.
Team Coyote. Coyotes they're a member of the canid family, so the dog family. which, makes sense. And they probably evolved here in Western North America like 6 million years ago, give or take. And they're really cool critters. They're a lot smaller than most people think. So a lot of people, see coyote and they're like, ooh, big predator. But they're like 20 to 40 pounds out here in the West, maybe a little bit more in the East. And they've got those big, nice coats that make them look bigger. But they're super interesting. They're in the order Carnivora, so they're carnivores, but behaviorally they're omnivorous, which just they kind of put everything and anything in their mouths, which makes their diet super interesting to study. And also, I'm sure we'll get to this, but contributes a lot to their success. And so they'll hunt, they'll forage. They're all over the place. And they have these really interesting social structures that a lot of people don't really pay attention to or know much about. So they're actually monogamous across like many breeding seasons and even potentially, until one of the pair dies, and they'll both contribute to raising the pups. They can be individuals or they can live in packs, and they have these, they're super interesting socially. They're super interesting behaviorally. So they're kind of like just the more wild version of your dog that you have like sitting next to you at home.
Right. That's so cool. I did not sure if I knew that they were monogamous. I think maybe I had an inkling of that, but never confirmed.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's always so crazy to me because I've worked with wolves and coyotes in captivity. So I have like some understanding. Obviously, that's like obscured or like a skewed version of it. But I have like some understanding of the animals. And it's like all you have to do is spend a little bit of time, even if you're just doing like wildlife photography and you're like appreciating these animals from far away. I can't believe that they're so vilified and just completely made out to be these destructive, mangy, disgusting, they all carry rabies. I mean, I'm from Northern Illinois, so it's just farm fields out here, and you can just shoot coyotes. Like, you don't need any reason or rhyme to do it. You're encouraged to shoot coyotes, and people will go out of their way to be like, oh, saw coyotes on my property, gotta shoot them, without even understanding why they need to shoot them. It's a very classic case of fear mongering for an animal. And I don't know if I can think of an animal off the top of my head that gets more vilified. I mean, I would say that snakes even in around here are less vilified than coyotes. It's like across the board, people hate coyotes out here. So I'm hoping that, I'm certain that this episode will kind of give some people a little bit more background and understanding of these animals, that we should appreciate them. And I'm sure we'll talk about the ecology and stuff, but this isn't my episode. So I just get to weigh in on at random points and talk about whatever I want. So
no, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can kill coyotes pretty much anywhere, just no permits or anything. And we'll get to it, but they're really vilified for not really any good reason. So yeah, hopefully this episode, makes people like coyotes a little bit more.
Right. Yeah. We'll circle back around to this for sure. Talking a little bit more about why they get why they want to be so like over controlled, but it is definitely something that when you think coyote, you think about people wanting to shoot them and that kind of thing. But I personally have some really beautiful memories with some coyotes. There was some that used to live by my grandma's house, and if you howled, they would, or maybe they weren't responding to you, but it felt like they were responding, and you could like howl with the coyotes in the farmland, and that was really nice for me. So I don't know if you have like a special coyote memory to share with us before we get back into your research a bit more.
Oh man, I mean, I spend a lot of my free time trying to like go around and find coyotes, and so I've got some super cool. My most sort of recent cool memory, I guess, is I was down at Bosque del Apache, which is this wildlife refuge just about an hour and 20 minutes south of Albuquerque. And I had stopped along the side of the road with one of my friends because we saw this coyote that was soaking wet, just like walking along the side of this canal. It's like this sort of irrigated, managed habitat. And so we stopped and waited for a while, and this coyote sat down next to the canal and was just sort of staring into it. And we just stood there watching it. And after about 10 minutes, just dove in straight into the canal over his head and came out with like a 14-inch carp and just and just dragged it off into this field and started eating it. And we watched it sort of feast for like 15 or 20 minutes and then headed back. But I think, what's really interesting, I mean, most of my memories and experiences with coyotes have kind of been them surprising me, because you never know what you're going to see one do. It's pretty fascinating. I don't think I've ever seen a coyote doing the same thing twice. So.
Right. That's crazy. And I don't know how many accounts there are necessarily of coyotes fishing, but
yeah, there's a few. It seems like this is a particular location where there are multiple individuals who have learned how to do this one way or another. So I think it's totally fascinating, but
right.
Yeah, definitely
so
not the most common.
Segues really well into just asking why coyotes are so successful, first off, in natural habitats. What makes them such a great competitor and makes them just a successful animal overall?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of what makes them successful is that they have this really high degree of behavioral plasticity, right? So you see these behavioral shifts when they're exposed to environmental changes, and there can be a lot of like individual variation as well. So like, for instance, there's evidence that they exhibit what's called compensatory breeding. So if there's pressure from the environment or from humans on their population, they can actually increase or decrease their size of their litters based on population pressure, which is just fascinating. And they're also omnivorous, which we talked a little bit about, but it's really helpful when you're trying to exist in a wide variety of environments to be able to use a wide variety of foods to get your energy and mate and reproduce and survive. And also their social structure can be pretty variable. You can have coyote packs and coyote families, and you can also have like individual transient coyotes who just sort of wander around and do their own thing. So the fact that they're just so dynamic as a species, but as individuals as well, really caters to them doing well in all sorts of environments.
Now that's actually super interesting. I'm kind of going to call back to like the beginning part of that, where you talked about them basically surveying their available resources and potential pressures, whether it be anthropocentric or necessarily like environmental factors that determine whether or not they can and can't have a certain litter size. I know that to be something that's like researched in wolves. Like wolves will do that, where they will basically, the females will like absorb a certain amount of like fetuses if they determine that it's not going to be viable for them to, reproduce that amount of babies in the given environment. So if there's a year where there's less food availability or, whatever other factors determine what the wolves determine are going to affect, oh my God, I'm thinking of snakes. I was going to say clutch size. And now my brain, I'm like in herp mode still. My brain is like, litter, to determine the litter sizes. So that's really interesting that I guess it would make sense, right? Because they're in the Canis genus, which is the same as wolves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, they're not far off. So I guess that behavior would make sense that it carried over. I just think that's incredibly interesting that it's not been looked into more. That's just really cool.
Yeah. And it's, I think it's one of those things that's fairly difficult to study directly. Also, now you just have me picturing like a wolf with a bunch of eggs waiting for them to hatch.
Well, now I'll have to leave that. Really I'll have to leave that in. I can't edit that out.
No, you can't. That's adorable. All right, so they're really successful. They have a lot of good traits that could make them really good invasive species, which is usually what we always talk about on this podcast. So are coyotes actually considered invasive anywhere in the world?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's hard because we don't really have a good definition of invasive, right?
Mhm.
Like that's a really contentious word in general. So for example, coyotes have not been introduced anywhere.
Mhm.
Like, we haven't taken coyotes and like transported them to a new place and said, be free, like cane toads or what have you. Um, but we have pretty directly facilitated their expansion into all of these new environments through deforestation and the extirpation of wolves, and potentially even, building cities and having that type of infrastructure that they can use. And so it's a tough question because we haven't, they're doing all this on their own, but we're
Right.
facilitating it. And that brings, you mentioned this concept of the neonative, which, to be totally honest, isn't a concept that I'd spent, that I had really heard much about before,
Mhm.
but did a little bit of research. And it seems like, it's this really practical concept to describe, an animal that is able to expand its range based on humans facilitating that through like environmental change specifically.
Mhm.
And I think it's really interesting because there are still like some nuances there, right? Because it's not just our changes to the environment that are allowing coyotes to expand. It's things like directly killing wolves and cutting down trees. And so I'm not quite sure where that puts coyotes on the spectrum of how much we've actually facilitated their expansion. Their range has increased drastically in the past few hundred years, and they're actually, so they're all the way, they crossed the Panama Canal in 2014, and they're all the way down into southern Panama. And the Darien National Park is like their last barrier before they actually get to South America, which would be a huge deal. And I think there's going to be that conversation because when you have a critter that's expanded its range so far and so quickly, you're going to have impacts on ecosystems, and we don't really know what those look like yet. But it's tough. I wouldn't call coyotes an invasive species, but some, I was looking at the Georgia Department of Fish and Game or whatever, and they label coyotes as a non-native species. And like Nicholas mentioned earlier, pretty much every state you can kill coyotes. There's no season, you don't need a license, et cetera. And so they're definitely treated as like a quote unquote pest. But invasive is a tough one. I wouldn't say they're invasive, but that's totally up for debate.
Quick anecdotal side note, because I think one of the first things we did in this podcast was break down the fact that invasive is not clearly defined, nor does it necessarily conform to the typical version of what people consider invasive, which is non-native introduced species, because it doesn't function that way. It doesn't function as every single thing is being directly introduced to an environment it couldn't normally get to. There's different factors because humans are a global invasive species. We just have spread other things. So our anthropomorphic influence is just affecting it on multiple different levels. So it's incredibly difficult to determine what is truly invasive and where we should draw the line. There's no clear-cut way to do that. And yeah, it's incredibly difficult. So I appreciate you highlighting that because I know some people have argued with me in the past that my definition of invasive species is not accurate. So
I don't think agreed.
We also love to go over and over and over in this podcast about how gray everything in ecology is, which makes it wonderful, exciting, horrible, and frustrating all at the same time. So, we have to play with gray areas. And unfortunately, when we do research, sometimes we have to, shove things into boxes they don't necessarily fit in. But things are fluid. You'll notice anybody who's taken an ecology degree, like there's not a lot of multiple choice when it comes to definitions, because you could write about and argue in a lot of different ways. So I think everybody should keep an open mind. And that was a super answer about the question if they're invasive or not, and very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they are, what we can agree on is that they are moving into new areas, and this has been facilitated by people, and looks like they might even come down into South America, which, yes, could be extremely polemic and very difficult. So why are they so successful then to moving into these new places? Or is this just a repeat answer of why they're so good at surviving in natural habitats?
Yeah, I mean, I would say mostly a repeat answer. Like they're, the same way that they're incredibly good at dealing with environmental pressures in general, they're incredibly good at dealing with human caused pressures. And then also the fact that we have killed and or made the environment hospitable to most of these like big, sexy apex predators like wolves and mountain lions, that doesn't hurt Coyote's success. They don't really have any of that top-down pressure anymore. So they've ascended to this role of top predator in a lot of these environments, but with the behavioral flexibility of these smaller, medium-sized mammals that just are generally more successful than the larger, like hypercarnivorous ones. In urban environments specifically.
No, it makes sense. Yeah, if you're kicking out the guy at the top of the pyramid, then the next one's just gonna be able to move up.
But I guess a second answer to that question would be like, we don't actually know, right? And so that's the whole. That's a lot of like why I'm getting a PhD is we don't know, we don't really understand all the nuances of why certain species and or certain individuals are really successful in urban environments and why some aren't.
Right. Stay tuned, essentially.
give me half a decade and I'll get back to you.
Exactly. I mean, we'll be around. For anybody that's curious, that tagging along on the research and seeing photos of coyotes with giant fish, there will be links to Zoe's website and Instagram in the show notes, and as well on our Instagram. So definitely check that out too. All right. So in the case for them possibly being a little bit of problematic, do they actually cause any problems for native flora and fauna when they move into a new area, for what we know of?
It's an interesting question because one, their expansion is happening relatively rapidly. So there hasn't been a ton looking at this, but like I was mentioning, their expansion has been largely facilitated by the removal of wolves. And so they've ascended to sort of this top predator role in a lot of these disturbed ecosystems. And so, I think a lot of the time they're eating a lot of the same prey that wolves may have been eating, in that role previously. Obviously, they're not taking down, as many moose or elk or like adult deer as wolves would be, but they're a major predator of fawns, during the breeding season, et cetera. So I don't know that that's as much of an issue in their current range. I think that comes into play more when we're talking about like, okay, you now have coyotes on the verge of going into South America. You have these communities of smaller mammals and birds and, et cetera, who haven't been exposed to coyotes as a predator before. And I think there's definitely some concern about what their ecological impact will be in, a biodiverse region where all their prey are naive to a predator like that. A lot of the same things, with deforestation and the removal of these apex predators, even though they look different in South America than they do up here, it's hard to understand what role sort of a changing top tier predator is going to play in an ecosystem until it happens.
Right. No, for sure. And there's definitely a huge problem with removal of apex predators in South America with jaguars and pumas and stuff. And as well, from my experience in like Andean South America and Ecuador and stuff, like we mostly also just have mesopredators. Like the largest carnivore here is like the lobo del páramo, which is essentially a small coyote. Like it's like, right. So they're already.
Weirdly enough, I think there's a great paper on this from 2019, I think. But I think the crab-eating fox, which is a mammal native to South America, is sort of swapping the coyote. So it's on sort of an equal but opposite trajectory up north. And it has a lot of those same coyote characteristics, but it's going to be fascinating to see what happens, whether, that's good or bad is to be seen, and for interpretation.
I think you just brought up like an incredible point in many incredible points, but essentially you're talking about the niche occupation, the free niches that are available due to the lack of wolves and things like that, which you brought up earlier as being a driver for the increased movement of these, coyotes into new areas, because typically they would be controlled or outcompeted by the presence of wolves in those areas, being that there are no wolves there anymore because we've hunted them or, developed that land. Now the coyotes can move in and occupy that niche. So to some extent, yeah, it's going to be beneficial because they're going to be controlling, those, I guess, prey items that would normally be controlled by wolves. But if there were no wolves, then those populations are going to explode. For example, the white-tailed deer. We all know how that's going poorly. And even though they're not predating like full-size deer probably most of the time, they are eating the fawns, which could be just as important control as, a larger predator predating the fully grown adults. So, yeah, there could be the negatives of, okay, they're preying on certain animals that wouldn't necessarily be predated upon by wolves, but there's probably a significant overlap. So to some degree, they have both positive and probably in some cases negative effects. So it just makes it even more difficult to determine. So you can't just say, okay, well, coyotes are doing this damage, blah, 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 blah. You also have to take into account the lack of presence of wolves in these areas and what those effects are. So it becomes increasingly difficult because, it's just, for all of the reasons we just talked about, it's very confusing and there's so many different things and factors that play into it. I'm probably just going to keep bringing this up at how confusing it is. And there's just it's difficult to find answers for situations like this, but
and there's a bunch of people trying, there's a lot of work, being done on, okay, well, how well do coyotes actually replace wolves in certain systems? And it's interesting because there's always going to be differences.
Right. You need quantifiable data. Like, what are they actually eating? Because I've read papers on both sides of it. I've read papers that say coyotes don't really have a positive impact on skunks and opossums and raccoon populations and things like that. But then I've also read papers that say the exact opposite of that. But they're done in completely different areas. And with coyotes being, as you mentioned with your fish story, so drastically different in their behaviors, there might be populations of coyotes that are more beneficial to their specific ecosystem than they are in another place, which is insane to think about. So kudos to you because, man, I study turtles and they are pretty simple creatures.
Yeah, but they got those big smiley faces. Well, I guess coyotes have big smiley faces too. So
right, yeah. So I love turtles, but coyotes it's so intricate and detailed stuff that you have to contend with.
A coyote could take on a big snapping turtle.
Oh man. Yeah, I think so. I think a coyote would be smart enough to flip it over and get it there. They have a really small reduced plastron because they kind of sit at the bottom and then also need room for their muscles. So I think a coyote would probably be smart enough. And I bet you I have seen snapping turtles that have been predated by coyotes because they've been flipped on their backs and then eaten. So
no, they do that. They do that to porcupines too.
Yeah. So I bet you, that behavior is easily adaptable to snapping turtles. So I bet you in the whole of human history, there are many cases of coyotes winning against snapping turtles. I think the worst a snapping turtle is going to do is maybe bite off a coyote's little nubbins on his nose or something. But
all right. Now my question, Nicholas, could you take on a coyote?
Oh.
The answer to that is yes.
I would put life or death situation. I would put a coyote in the ground, but I would feel so bad about it. I would never like actively fight a coyote. I would never fight any animal. I would like, because like my ecologist mindset kicks in. I'll be like, why would I be in a situation where I had to fight a coyote? Because like in most cases they're
I
exactly,
don't
they're
know.
gonna run away.
I don't-
They're not a threatening animal. Like I would have to put that coyote in a situation where it was defending itself from me, and then I would be the aggressor, which I would not put myself in that situation in the first place. So I'm gonna avoid the question. But like video game style, choose your fighter, Nicholas versus Coyote, I could take on like 4 coyotes, I think.
Bold statement. If there's any super bored like programmers out there that wants to throw down a video of Nicholas fighting some coyotes,
Yeah,
we
I will
can't
give
pay
you all my
but-
stats.
I'd love it. Sorry, Zoe, I think we cut you off there for a second.
Oh no, you're fine. I was just gonna play devil's advocate to the not wanting to fight any animal because the mosquitoes are back in Albuquerque. But you know, I totally agree with you on the
All right,
coyote
how many
front.
mosquitoes could you fight?
I can fight so many mosquitoes, and I do it on the regular, and they win every time.
I was gonna say I feel like I lose every time.
Yeah.
All right. I feel like mosquitoes have like a weird part in the like hearts of every biologist because we know that there is some function there, but we just hate them so much.
I'm gonna refuse to believe that, and people can come at me.
All right. You have been officially invited to @Zoe about the function of mosquitoes, everyone.
Actually, no, I don't want that responsibility or that anger. I don't need to be reminded they exist more than that they already remind me.
All right. Uninvited to @Zoe about mosquitoes. You can @me about mosquitoes, though.
Yes, do that.
All right. So speaking of Nicholas fighting for coyotes, no, I'm just kidding. This sounds like I don't know, this question is like harder for me to ask. And I think this is just like charismatic mammal like bias, but how are coyotes controlled in the areas where they're unwanted? It's something we do have to touch on. But it feels wrong, but I'm gonna
how do we try to control them, or what's successful?
Yes.
Okay.
Both, that's great. I want to hear a little bit of both. How do we try and what's successful?
Yeah, we try a lot. None of it's very successful. But no, I mean, we've spent over 100 years and hundreds of millions of dollars trying every tactic under the sun to extirpate coyotes. I mean, we've shot them, we've had killing contests, we still do have killing contests, we've poisoned them, you know, and their response has kind of just been to increase in population and range size and habitat, and just generally say like F you to all those methods. There are a lot of non-lethal control methods. Some work better than others. And of course, like Nicholas keeps coming back to, that's another gray area. It's pretty confusing, and, you know, why certain methods work in certain areas and don't in others is, you know, is something that people are trying to understand. But, you know, they're also controlled through those methods, hazing and exclusion and fences and changing husbandry practices, et cetera.
Right. Yeah, I know my family like has always had livestock dogs, and I think that's such an important thing.
Yeah.
There was a really interesting talk, Be the Uproar. I don't know if anybody knows, like there was Peter Allison was doing some in the bush YouTube videos. You can look them up, and they talked a little bit about a guy that's studying like livestock dogs and the way to improve, just like worldwide, the way to improve like our human wildlife conflict. Like that's just
livestock llamas too.
Yes, and donkeys sometimes will chase off coyotes.
Yeah.
So it's super interesting. That's something maybe if I were to ever do a master's in actual research, I might do that. But
I think the non-lethal control stuff is awesome. I think the large scale lethal control has, you know, sort of been proven over and over to not really do much of anything, and often kind of have the opposite effect as intended. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a controversial one, but I know they're definitely getting banned in more and more places, like the killing contests and things that you talked about, because it's just doesn't feel very humane to me, even if it's something that's problematic, quote unquote problematic species. It doesn't, I don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
Complicated. So why do people want to control coyotes? That's the question that's maybe a little less gray, but maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think there's we've got a long history with coyotes, here in the United States. And, once we sort of made the decision and carried it out to get rid of wolves, coyotes were just sort of the next thing that we turned to. So we started, large scale eradication attempts on coyotes in like the early 1900s. And I think a lot of that has carried over, and they're often, I think, the biggest reason that people in general want to kill coyotes is because we really don't understand them that well. There's a lot of people who want to kill coyotes because they're worried that coyotes are going to predate their livestock, or they're worried that coyotes are going to attack their kid or their dog or them. And, you do have events happening, and, in certain areas and on certain livestock, coyotes can be a real problem, but I think their threat is generally sort of overhyped and they're not as much of a threat as we perceive them to be. And in fact, I mean, going back to your question about how they're so successful in urban environments, they really do go out of their way to not deal with us. Like, they're diurnal. Their behavior in natural areas, they're out during the day hunting and doing all their coyote living. And in environments where there's people and where there's pressure, they're pretty much only nocturnal in a lot of these areas. And there've been studies showing that if that pressure, like if hunting and killing pressure on coyotes by humans is removed, they switch back to that diurnal behavior in like a matter of years. It's amazing. Right. And so, I think they really do go out of their way to avoid us. But, seeing a decent sized carnivore in a city where you haven't been taught that there should be carnivores, or where maybe there weren't coyotes 10 years ago, it's unnerving. And so I think if you don't understand, like you were saying, you fear what you don't understand. And so if you don't understand coyotes and how they behave, and what is a real thing that you need to deal with and what's just sort of a bad reputation, I think that's what contributes to this sort of desire to get rid of them.
Right. And it's the human wildlife conflict is such a difficult thing, because like you said, there are some incidents, like especially with sheep, like very small lambs and those kind of things. And people do get their pets taken and things like that sometimes. But yeah, there's just this aspect where we need to maybe shift our perspective that even if there are these risks, we are part of the earth, which has risks in it in all these different forms. And we just have to learn how to try to live with them maybe a little better. But Nicholas, do you have anything to add on why people want to control coyotes, or do you think that was about it?
I mean, honestly, I've been just kind of sitting over here picturing donkeys chasing off coyotes for like the last 10 minutes. And all I can think of is Donkey from Shrek, just annoying coyotes until they leave an area, like a swamp, for example.
Like going up to him and like,
oh, for 5 minutes. Could you not be yourself? For 5 minutes!
Yeah, exactly.
No, I mean it is real life. Like the large donkeys, obviously not like the miniature ones, but they can bond the same way with llamas with like a herd of sheep, and they'll protect them. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, to actually respond to your question in a non-sarcastic way, we'll see how long I last being non-sarcastic, but I'll try my best. I think around here it tends to be that people just have that negative connotation and just believe it without any sort of background information. My grandpa shot coyotes, so my dad shot coyotes, so I shoot coyotes because I know they're bad, even though they have no frame of reference for it. It's just like, hearsay, fear-mongering type stuff too. I mean, you get movies and things like that that always vilify it or make the coyote out to be the bad guy. You know, they steal your chickens or whatever. But it's like free meals, and then like coyotes are incredibly intelligent animals. And I always find it funny, like when humans hate intelligent animals and they always consider those animals to be nuisance because they outsmart them, and it's just like humans being like the prideful and like their pride is hurt and just being like, well, they outsmarted me, so I better kill them, you know. And in that case, it's like, well, who's the real animal in this situation? The animal just outsmarted you, so you retaliate by just killing it and its entire family, you know. So it's a societal thing. It's the same thing with a lot of predators, a lot of misunderstood animals. I think Zoe's covered it really well, that it's definitely a lack of education and a lack of communication about the importance and the overall adaptations that these animals have. So, you know, if you expose people to coyotes, if you expose people to the important things that they have, then people start to understand, and you can start shifting as a society, because we can sit here all day and talk about it, but Farmer John isn't going to listen to you unless one of his other farmer friends comes and starts saying, hey, like I was convinced to leave coyotes, and, you know, look at the good things that started to happen, or, you know, I blah, 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 whatever, etc. And I'm sure we'll get into the positives of coyotes later, because we haven't really heavily touched on that yet. But yeah, it's a societal thing, to simplify it.
Right. Yeah. Complicated. And yeah, it's mostly that, I think, misperceptions and things. And of course, yeah, I mean, we also have to try to walk in the footsteps of people that haven't been given quite the same education, or, you know, parents that have raised them to see things in a different light, or have studied ecology, that it's hard to understand, you know, when you lose two lambs or something that year, or a couple sheep or whatever, to not be frustrated as well. So this is the other dynamic of that too, is finding a way to make it work for everybody, right? So on that note, yeah, as Nicholas was just leading us into, what are some of the good things that coyotes do for us then?
Yeah, I mean, they're great. They make me happy to start off with. No,
Yeah.
I mean, like we've touched on a little bit, they've taken over the role of top predator in a lot of these, you know, heavily modified environments, of which there are many, right? And so, you know, coyotes are that, like Nicholas was saying earlier, there's some, you know, conflicting evidence about whether they actually have an impact on populations of like other mesocarnivores like raccoons and opossums, et cetera. But they do. There is, you know, lots of evidence that they have impact on white-tailed deer populations and squirrels and, you know, rodents and other rodents and, you know, geese and rabbits. And so, you know, and a lot of critters like rodents and whatnot that are known to carry diseases that are transmissible to humans. And so these are all other animals that survive really well in modified environments. And so having creatures like coyotes to control those types of critters is pretty important. Feral cats, you know, I know that people don't want their cat to get munched.
You don't want to go down the cat road. We're gonna be going on for hours. It devolves very quickly. I get very upset.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna mute myself again.
I was about to mute you, so
this happens. This always happens. I ended up in like a networking room at a conference the other day, and within like 10 minutes, just everybody was talking about feral cats, and I was like, I don't know how much of this I can take.
It's a tricky one. We might do an
eat them. So
Okay,
that's you know, the circle of life. But yeah, they play a really important role in, you know, in the food chain and in regulating populations of their prey. And we know that. And so, you know, they're not like, you know, they're not doing anything spectacular. They're just playing their role in the ecosystem, which is pretty spectacular in itself. But
doing their part, doing their thing, doing what they need to do. Awesome. That's so great. So, I mean, hopefully that part resonates with some people, like the part in their ecosystem that's really important. Is there anything before we wrap this up? Because I think we've covered most things. Is there anything I missed that maybe I didn't ask I should have that you want to add before we start to head into the end?
Yeah, I just think, on the note of like people being afraid of coyotes and like, and having these like unfavorable attitudes, like there's nothing, like that's what a lot of people are taught, right? And that's ingrained in the history of our country and our policies and our et cetera. And so, there are cases where, a coyote attacks a human, or you get your chihuahua snatched up, or you get your livestock predated upon, and when those things happen, it's it's important to recognize those things, because ecology and conservation and and mitigation of human wildlife conflict, it doesn't get done by like shaming people who have negative experiences or viewpoints on animals, right? And so I think it's important to note that, it's okay if somebody's afraid of coyotes. And instead of being like, oh, it's stupid that you're afraid of coyotes, you're like, okay, well, like, let's look at what the risks are and how much less likely you are to get attacked by a coyote than, say, a dog. And, the fact that they're really going out of their way to avoid you. But I think a part of that is recognizing that there are problems. There are nuisance individuals, and it's okay to deal with those individuals, right? Like ecology isn't this pretty picture perfect thing, right? And so when you have a coyote that's attacking people, which rarely does happen, or is, getting too involved with people, or is, picking off livestock, it's important to recognize that that's not okay from the human perspective of things, and that there are certain cases where dealing with an individual is warranted. But I think along with that comes the education that, like, okay, that's not okay, but also that's not normal, right? Like a coyote attacking people isn't normal. And then you can start the conversation about like, okay, well, if it's not normal, why does it happen? And you can get into the fact that like, well, most coyote attacks or carnivore attacks in general on humans happen because humans have been feeding them, right? And they learn to associate humans with food, and then they can become aggressive. And then you can teach people about like, okay, well, maybe like here's how to interact and watch wildlife, and here's how not to interact them and how not to feed them, et cetera. And so I think, nothing gets solved if you exclude people from the equation. You have to, recognize that whether or not you agree with people's emotions surrounding coyotes being valid, like they exist, and just telling them like, oh, that's stupid, coyotes are amazing, isn't going to fly with some farmer who's lost sheep to coyotes, right? And so I think that there are really good ways to approach it. And I think that there's a lot of education happening, and that, people are starting to have less negative viewpoints of coyotes. But I think, like any other animal, it's not like those things don't happen, I guess.
Right.
That being said, you don't need to worry about coyotes. They're not going to attack you.
Right. That was really, really well put. Thank you for that, Zoe. That was awesome.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I'm going to put on my actually serious hat right now. Before I was wearing my sometimes serious hat, but I'm going to put on my real serious hat right now. And just say that I think what you just said was so incredible. That is perfectly oriented to what we're trying to communicate through this podcast, is that science communication is so vitally important to both the furthering of the science itself, but also the aiding in conservation efforts and any sort of environmental science efforts that are being put in place. Because if you are unable to communicate your science or research or whatever your study species is to the general public, then in my opinion, and this is pretty blunt, your science has failed, because your science might apply to other scientists specifically studying that, but that is an incredibly, incredibly small number of people. Your science, in one way or another, needs to be communicated to the general public, because that's where, one, your funding is going to come from, but two, and probably more importantly, just general support of your research and the implications of your research and all things. I'm taking this specifically from like a Coyote standpoint right now, but I do believe it applies to pretty much all research. And science communication does not function based on negativity. I mean, communication in general doesn't function on negativity. Never once in the whole of human history has someone ever won an argument by calling someone else a stupid idiot. That, like, it's never worked. Like, berating somebody else because they see things differently than you is not positive science communication. And you need to communicate it in a positive way, which does mean understanding that people are passionate about the opposite of how you may feel. So it's your duty to both communicate in a productive and kind way to other people, but also understand that people believe the things they do generally for a very specific and personal reason. So you do your best to counteract that and sort of provide information for the people, but you also have to understand that you might not be able to convince everyone to be on your side, but you will convince nobody to be on your side by being a dick.
Don't be a dick. Nicholas 2021.
Right.
No, I totally agree. I think communicating science is vital, and we don't do a very good job of that at this point. We're starting to do a better job, but hopefully that trajectory continues.
I think I'm seeing a lot of the newer generations of scientists are especially with social media. I mean, it's an incredible tool. And I mean, hell, we're doing a science podcast right now. We are doing science communication. It's everywhere. And people are getting better at it. They're understanding that you can't just get into Facebook arguments. You can't be condescending. You can't be elitist. That doesn't help. First off, that's just not a good way to live your lifestyle, all negatively like that. But also, it's just very, very counteractive against science efforts. Because you might have some scientists who are doing super, super well at communicating science, and then one person comes in and just ruins it by being a dick, and then, you know, that person just shuts off other scientists. So one person can ruin it for all. So we do have to work together to some degree to basically, you know, communicate science properly. That was my soapbox I have one every episode, but this was
I usually just fast forward that part.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
so
kidding, Nicholas.
Welcome back to post soapbox.
I'm just kidding, Nicholas. I super respect you as a science communicator, and I love your stuff. So
super respect you.
I super respect. I like the word super. Okay. Zoe, so we kind of sort of mentioned it, but when I do my episodes, I like to try to wrap up with some good news. Do you have some specific good news in the realm of your research or coyotes in general? Or is that just kind of, I mean, we sort of talked about people getting a better attitude, but not sure if you have.
I mean, coyotes are just like a whole success story. Right? Like, right. I mean, coyotes are all good news. It's really, I used to study elephants, and man, studying coyotes it's kind of fun to study an animal that's like thriving. Not that studying elephants is not fun. It's very fun, but coyotes are doing great. That's the good news. And, you know, no matter what we throw at them, they're not going anywhere. So we're going to have to figure out how to live with them one way or another. But yeah, like you mentioned, I think one of the really nice things that has honestly been pretty surprising to me is the positive. There are more people who have a positive viewpoint on coyotes than I would have expected. And I'm not talking about, you know, like the crowd of like early career scientists that are like, ooh, coyotes are amazing. You know, I'm talking about members of the community, right? And I think one of the coolest things since starting to study coyotes is that people just want to talk about coyotes to me. And, you know, like we started off the episode pretty much with like an impromptu coyote story from Kirsten. And it's I get that all the time. Like I have people sliding into my DMs like, I found this coyote on my property. And like, I just wanted to tell you. And it's so cool. It happens all the time. And so I think, with education about, what the misconceptions are, how little of a threat coyotes really are, et cetera, to personal safety and whatnot, I think people do get excited when they find out that they share their backyard or, their street or their community park or their golf course with coyotes. And
Right.
I wasn't expecting so much positivity. And I obviously there are people out there that have very negative views of coyotes, as we've spent, a lot of the episode talking about, but I see a lot more positivity than I was expecting. And so that it makes me really happy. And I think, I think the field of urban ecology as it grows and evolves is going to be really important in sort of keeping that dynamic going.
Right.
Yeah. Coyotes are just all good news.
They are. That's awesome. I only have one regret from this whole episode, and it's that people can't see your face because you just absolutely glow when you speak about this stuff, and it's incredible. Like your passion is there. And if you guys aren't following Zoe already, get on that because she is like the Coyote #1 fan club, and it's great.
I'm gonna put that on my CV.
#1 Coyote. Leader of
#1 Coyote fan.
Yeah, exactly. Do it up there in the hobbies. Yeah, it would be great.
I mean, hey, I get to study pretty much the coolest animal on the planet. It's,
Well, debatable. There are snapping turtles.
Haven't we already settled this?
Yeah, yours could kill mine. That doesn't mean they're cooler.
Oh, man.
Side note, though, if you do want to see Zoe's beaming coyote-loving face, and not mine because my connection is unstable, which is good anyway because you don't want to see that. If you guys donate to us or start donating to us, please, anyone, we will do video episodes or at least bonus episodes for people who donate a certain amount, which we have yet to decide. But you know what? We're cheap, so. We're scientists. We're poor. We need any money.
Well, maybe you're cheap. No, I'm just kidding. Actually,
Fine.
on that note,
I'm cheap. Pay me money. Kirsten obviously doesn't need any.
All right, but yes, yeah. So we can actually go ahead and release these videos to you, but it's just helpful to get a little bit of support. On that note, I'm going to really quickly, before we wrap up, give a quick shout out to Jasmine Little, who actually was our first donator. And we gave her a little shout out on Instagram, but Jasmine, if you're listening, you the best.
You rock.
Awesome.
All right. By the way, if these videos, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
If these videos get released, the glow isn't from the coyotes. It's from the fact that it's like 100 degrees and I have my swamp cooler off so that it doesn't interfere with the sound.
Oh, man. No, it was great. Thank you so much. So sometimes in our episodes, we do a debate round, but because this episode was unique, I think we're going to just move along because we also covered everything so well. I had a really great time. Nicholas had a great time getting his butt kicked by coyotes.
Oh, excuse me.
Wait, Nicholas, have you come up with your pun yet?
I spent like a solid amount of this podcast looking up coyote puns, and boy, there are none.
No, there aren't. I've been down that road.
There's really not any. So I was hoping that was gonna get forgotten, but sorry to disappoint. I hope the rest of my dumb puns and commentary were enough for the listeners.
I believe you owe me an apology about the episode name, though. Being the best pun.
No, I firmly stand by that.
Bueno. All right. Well, thank you so much, Zoe. That was incredible. It was so cool to have you on as a guest today. It really just brings so much to us, to our listeners, to get somebody that's an expert in what they're doing to give that perspective. So we are eternally grateful, and maybe we'll see you in a couple years for a follow-up to see how things are going on in your research.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being a part of our podcast. We loved it. I had a great time.
I mean, I just want to make a recommendation. If the Anthropocene needs a mascot, I would say coyotes are one of the more worthy candidates.
I think that might be controversial, but
send them my way. I'll change their mind.
Yeah, the Anthropos. See, yeah, I got nothing. Yeah, well, I'll get to it later.
Anthropo, see you later.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
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 Thanks for listening to this episode of The Anthropocene.
Be sure to follow us on all social media, and feel free to reach out to us with any comments, corrections, or suggestions for future episodes or species you'd like to see us cover.